Live and direct, live and a date no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, and welcome back. It's another episode of the Koala podcast. And as I was trawling LinkedIn recently, I came across a link to an art paper by Khalid Tinasti, who I've got on the show today, about legalization, regulation, etc. in Morocco. Now, anybody who's listening to the show will know vaguely what's happening in Morocco, but only vaguely, I'd suggest. Khalid's paper was very informative, so I immediately pinged him and said, look, can you talk on the podcast about what led you to the paper and what's happening at the moment in Morocco, so people just listening to the show have a better sense of what legalization means in Morocco for cannabis. Khalid, welcome to the Koala podcast. I should have said, sorry, you are teaching at the Geneva Graduate Institute, the School of CCDP. Thank you for being on the show. Why are you writing about cannabis?
Thank you so much, Sean. Happy to be with you. So I would say that I work on drug policy generally, and I work on the international drug control regime. I'm also Moroccan, and so my interest in understanding how the whole field around cannabis is structured. Cannabis in Morocco has a special place. This is a plant that has been used for a very, very, very long time in mind uses, in different uses actually. And that has become, since the 60s and especially in the 80s, that has become
well, that's what coming from the UK, although I now live most of my time in Southeast Asia and Australia, that's what I grew up with, either Lebanese or Moroccan hashish. And not the best quality by the time it got to me.
No, yeah, actually, because this was part of what cannabis is in Morocco. Also the strains, also the production ways, I would say. It has also been influenced a lot by the demand markets, by the European markets for the recreational.
And that's since the 19th century, really, isn't it?
I would say that it really became at this scale. It started with the hippie movements from the 60s, coming from India, etc., and bringing with them new ways of cultivation, new strains that were actually very different from what we had in the country. Before that, it was a lot less, I would say, and a lot less export oriented. It became really a big market for Europe because of proximity, geographical, because also of the networks. I mean, when you go to the Netherlands, for example, with the criminal organizations, a lot of these people are originally from the Rif region, because also when we speak about cannabis in Morocco, it is quite geographically limited to the northern parts. There is what we call the historical areas, but that has spread all over in the Rif Mountains, the Berber Mountains in the northern Morocco.
And that latter part of the 20th century, so let's say the 60s through to the end of the century, what was government engagement with cannabis production in Morocco? Was it purely enforcement and it's bad, or was there sort of a gray area before these sorts of discussions opened up this century?
Yeah, when you look at the text, it is totally forbidden. So in Morocco, consumption, but also possession are the lowest level, actually, misdemeanors and felonies, but there are still prison sentences for that. In terms of production, it has always led to also sentences of prison that are quite lengthy, actually, for 10 years, etc. Nevertheless, there has been programs for substitution of crops that didn't really work out. This is a very specific region in Morocco as well. I don't know if we can get into it if we have the time for that, but this is a region that has had very little investment, economic opportunities or infrastructure during the 20th century, and has really changed since the early 21st century with the arrival of the new king and new programs of development of the north of Morocco. And so there was almost monoculture of cannabis in many places, and it was the only economic opportunity for a lot of families. So I would say because of that, there has always been also nuance on enforcement implementation. So, and I think it was a very clever idea because you don't want to turn into Central America or Latin America
Well, exactly.
where
You don't want to have then closed off paramilitary areas where the government don't have, they only have an element of control, don't they?
exactly, exactly. And so it was always been a very, so the social element of it has always been taken into account. And so it does not mean that the state in any way condoned or helped, but it means that the state has an overview that was a little bit larger than just focusing, okay, where we're going to enforce this. There was a lot of pressure, of course, from Europe to really eradicate production, etc. But the country still put forward its own interests generally versus these populations that had depended really on
Very
the plant.
smart. I mean, it's like North America with South America. The demand comes from the problem should be solved at the demand end, not the supply end. The demand creates the supply, not the supply the demand.
Yeah, but it's also the fact that, and when we talk about demand, so in terms of supply, there has been this that was very focused, and we're talking here just about the farmers. We're not talking about the criminal organizations that are trafficking, etc., because those are quite separate in Morocco, because farmers really, very few run actually the trafficking themselves. But in terms of demand in Morocco, there has not been, I mean, it has been very, very repressive on consumers, on Moroccan consumers. They are the forgotten element of everything. They're the forgotten element of prohibition for recreational, and they are the forgotten element for current legalization for medical and industrial uses.
Well, that's what I've noticed. So with the last king, it was essentially a no-no, keep it under the carpet. But when the new king came to power, I mean, I think I first started seeing information about changes in Moroccan government thought, what, about 10 years ago? Am I right?
I would say, I mean, specifically, I think Morocco, the difference in the since the early 21st century or the early 2000s is a country that has better surveillance systems that comes out with data. I mean, at least they try to do their best to share the data, etc. And that's not only in drug policy or in cannabis, it's kind of
Across the
everywhere in
board.
every
Yeah.
domain. And I would say, yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, I would say that it started really, the discussion started to shift. So at the international level, Morocco has been given more the voices of a better approach to drug control, of an approach that is comprehensive, that includes public health, that includes human rights, etc. And internally, actually, it was very much led by local voices. So, and especially again from the Reef Mountains, from the north. So there were the farmers that have created themselves their own advocacy and their own voices through their own associations and NGOs, but there were also some political parties or elected officials from two political parties that were very much from these places that have put forward the first laws to legalize cannabis uses for medical and for industrial uses. Then after that, the discussion grew and grew, and Morocco had a couple of years ago a commission on the new model of development, which was required to provide an overview of what the country would be or what the reforms that are needed. And they created a working group on cannabis under a very big, respected, big name professor of medicine in Morocco, Professor Hakima Hamish, and she led that effort. And they came up with two recommendations from Morocco. One was to legalize the medical and industrial, and the other one is to decriminalize the use, any recreational use. And so one of them happened, and the other one we're still kind of waiting on to be.
So that the one that happened is the legalization for medical. How how has how has that worked within Morocco? Because from the outside, generally, I see that it's an industry conversation that is like you see every and many other jurisdictions around the world, which is how do we get companies to create medical cannabis for export? So what has happened in terms of creating a medical cannabis environment in Morocco for Moroccans who would like to access medical cannabis?
Well, I think what you say is very right, and it's very unfortunate. So how it happened in Morocco is that It came out of the blue, basically. The law was prepared under closed doors, behind closed doors. There was no process, no transparency of how that has been built, and it just came out in February 2021. So a couple of months after the Commission on Narcotic Drugs has changed the status of cannabis in its schedules and removed it from Schedule 4, saying that it has no therapeutic value. Morocco, a couple of months ago, a couple of months later, the Ministry of Interior introduced this bill in Parliament. Actually, the bill was not really problematic in any way. It was well received in Morocco, well received by the public, well received by the other, I mean, kind of all the stakeholders, because it was a leap, actually, a really good step up front. There were oppositions, of course. We're talking about, parties that are more Islamic leaning, etc., that were very, very opposed to it. Nevertheless, it still passed. They didn't have the majority to block it. But it was very unfortunate because, in a sense, it was a law that has been very focused on two things. So, focused on the cover of saying, okay, well, we're going to be protective of farmers because we're going to provide them with a legal opportunity. But that is actually, for me, more of a cover than anything else. If that could happen, it would be great. It is moving very, 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 very slowly. But nevertheless, you cannot provide a better legal opportunity when there is no economic market behind. When you say, okay, well, we're going to export.
I mean, I presume there have been there have been various studies at Moroccan universities with regard to medical cannabis, but what has been set up in terms of a program that allow general practitioners or if applied specific practitioners to actually prescribe medical cannabis for particular, ailments, to use a better word.
But we still don't have any guidelines for that.
No guidelines whatsoever.
No, we don't have guidelines. We don't have training. There is this really mentality of we're going to export and we're going to send this to other markets. So that's why I said the consumer or the patient, the national one, is left behind. We're not structuring a national market.
And with regard for creating this export market, what are you seeing in terms of the thinking on the production of medical cannabis? Are they saying, oh, do you have basically Europeans and North Americans coming in and saying, we know everything, we will create separate production facilities that look like something out of a sci-fi movie, here, and here, and then that basically puts out the all the growers in the Rift region who are ready there to supply equally good product, but because nobody's walking around in a white lab coat, that Swiss thinking, I suppose, is the best way to put it, is shutting the reason why this was done in the first place.
Yeah, but the law is protective of the producers, of the growers. So you only have the right to produce in 3 different regions, which we call the traditional or historic areas of production, cultivation. There is a fact that only the growers that get licenses, small farmers have to get into cooperatives and get together. And so once they have this cooperative, that's how they get the license. And they cannot transform and they cannot do anything. They can only sell actually to the transform or to the companies, etc. So if North Americans or Europeans want to come, they can open their plant quite without a problem, but they will have to buy from these cooperatives. The law is
okay, so they have to buy what's grown and then process it within the plants.
Exactly.
And is there a distinction? I mean, Thailand has been a bit chaotic, but they've created a distinction between what we could call pure medical and then what you could call sort of what the Americans might call nutraceutical drugs or traditional medicines, as they call it in Thailand. Is that discussion in play in Morocco? So there's different markets for these growers?
There is, because of the levels of THC, but that's very specific when we call. So Morocco wants to kind of promote its traditional or its traditional strain, its traditional plant, which we call bildia.
So it should, because I mean the IP on that is invaluable. It's virtually priceless, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So they've given more and more licenses to produce the bildia. So they don't want to make it a specialty actually to be exported, to be used, etc. And they are, but that still has to respect the less than 1% THC. And so there is still a lot of debate ongoing there because there were many experiments and many production that did exceed it. So I think it's still in a trial phase to some extent, but they want to market it as such, actually, as really a local specialty or Morocco specialty strain. So I would say that is the only discussion that exists there, but not in terms of traditional medicine. In terms of traditional medicine, you have a lot of CBD formats, etc., and that you can very much find. When people think of Morocco, they always see that image of Marrakesh with the spice, cones, etc., and that's what we call attar, who sells that, who sells those spices. And so now they do sell actually CBD as well. That a lot of traditional women can use for as hair masks, for other products, etc. So that exists and it is ongoing, and that is the gray market to some extent in Morocco because it's quite difficult to find it. You don't find high level THC concentrates for any sort of medical, etc. Well, there are some pharmas that are interested in developing medicines, but you can very very easily find the CBD products or the plant with very low THC in those very traditional sort of shops.
And what do we know in terms of licensed cooperative producers? How much is being produced on an annual basis at the moment? I can only gauge what's being produced in Morocco by what enforcement agencies in Southern Europe confiscate. And I follow this, and you read 20 tons here, 30 tons here. I mean, it seems that the illicit market production in Morocco is huge, and they're obviously warehousing this stuff as well. Do you know the comparison between the very nascent legal production market and then the illicit market, which you're never going to know exact figures? I mean, is it 5% versus 95% at the moment or something like that?
Yeah, I would say so. If you think about it, last year, so the production in tons, let's say, was around 4,000 tons of the legal through everything that was given,
But
and it
that's
was
not a
quite a
small amount. I mean, a lot of other countries are struggling to get anywhere close to that.
yeah. But I mean, it was a huge leap from 2023. 2023, we were at less than 300 tons,
Hmm.
and so it was a huge leap. But in terms of if you compare it with the illegal one, I would say that it's at least the illegal one is at least 20 to 30 times bigger. And that's if we look just at the hectares that are being actually cultivated on one and the other, So but it's a huge difference. So the illegal market is still really really large. Again, I mean, the discussion has always been on. For me, is there really a market for the medical and industrial one alone? And is that realistic, to say, okay, we're going to reach a certain level of sales, we're going to reach a certain
Yeah,
level
well,
of
I mean, my argument, and I just wrote in an email to somebody in Australia, is until you regulate for adult use, and then you at that point you can really only then define not so much industrial. You can put that to the side because there's something different, but anything for human consumption, and can until you can define what adult use is, you can't define what medical is.
No, definitely. But I mean, even if you say, I mean, but even from very pure economic point of view, if you look at other markets, the US, some US states that have the adult use, Canada, etc., the money is in the is in the recreational market, regardless of what you mean. The real opportunities, if you really want to fight that production, and if you really want to have all these people move, and especially that the price you can sell a lot higher actually when you are in the illegal than when you are in the
Of
legal
course, yeah.
per kilo in Morocco, at least, similar to many other places. But that is where the money is. It's in the recreational. So how do you? Basically, how can you sell a regulation market when it is a very small one? You sell it or you market it as something that is big and that is going to be life changing and that is going to be changing for that region. Really, like that's just going to change its economic land and industrial landscape. There is no actually facts to back such a claim. There is no evidence to back it, and that's the problem. Again, I'm absolutely pro this regulation, and I'm pro, of course, very clearly
Well,
recreational.
regulation is a good thing because it controls the
Yeah,
black market, and it also means that, like anything else, especially anything humans are putting inside themselves or they're putting inside animals for feed, is if you
yeah.
don't regulate it, and there's
No,
always people who are going to put nasty stuff in there.
exactly. And I mean, for me, it was also a very good first step for Morocco to do that in 2021. And it was really important that Morocco moves towards this, legalization, because this is how you change mentalities. This is how you provide data, you provide evidence on what works and what doesn't. Nevertheless, what my worry is that it has not been understood as a first step. It's been understood as a final step,
Well,
but it's
that's what I
not.
was going to ask you next. So, where are we now? And is it you're sort of answering my question before I asked is that they think they solved the problem and the question hasn't even been asked. And I see this in, I mean, literally every jurisdiction on the planet, whether you're down at state level in the US or, they think that, oh, you put in one bit of fairly loose legislation and a few amendments, and then you've solved a problem. But I mean, all you have to do is, keep your eye open on the illicit market and see what law enforcement agents are doing. And you realize all you've done first is create a slightly bigger illicit market. Its first step out of 100 steps. Is Morocco making that same mistake?
Well, I would say that in Morocco, I don't think they solved the problem. So there is a lot of criticism actually of the regulation agency. So because they created an agency that provides these licenses and that does all the control. Again, the law in Morocco is under the Ministry of Home Affairs of
Yeah.
Interior. So it is police who are doing this. It's not the Ministry of Health. It's not the Ministry of Industry, etc. But there is a lot of problems. There is farmers that are marching against the fact that they have not been paid. Also, their contracts, when their contracts actually tell them
So
that they
that's
have.
interesting. So there's all that stuff going on as well, because this is
Yeah,
all under the radar for the likes of me, because I only read what's fed me in Morocco news. So you're saying systems have been set up, but there's already, okay, let's not use the word corruption, but ineffectiveness within the system that is creating problems for the people who are meant to have their problems solved. Yes.
well, you're coming into an area that is really, really problematic in itself, where you have a market, where you have a huge market, where Morocco is playing a big role. I mean, Moroccan cannabis now can be found even in Brazil. It goes through West Africa, etc. So you have a big player, and you have a region where people actually do depend on that. And so you come here, and you want to do all these regulations and all these rules, and really making sure that nothing is diverted, that the THC levels are respected, and you actually, instead of opening up, you kind of kill it with limitations. And so people are unhappy, and you are also trying to provide a lot of space for private investors, and you are more playing the games of big money that trying to come in,
Well,
etc. So
that's
because you want
again,
to
yeah,
attract those people.
capital seems to, I mean, again, and that leads to another question of mine is European or North American capital comes in and tells people the way it is. Is Morocco, or are the Moroccan government or authorities, are they thinking about talking to other jurisdictions on the African continent and looking at as this as a wider multi-jurisdictional approach to how, because I always see, I know I've just done some work in South Africa. I'm presenting another conference next year. I look at Africa and I already see European and US capital working out how to get in and exploit it, just as they did with minerals, agriculture, general agriculture. And the same playbook is about to be set off. And at the moment, I'm not seeing African governments talking to one another as to defend themselves from this capital and the way it works.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things there. So if this effort exists that is Pan-African, I'm not aware of it at
No,
all.
well, that's I don't think it's if it is, it's very nascent, and I just don't think people. I'm surprised that the governments, after the last 50 years of looking at how colonialism affected Africa, that's not one of the first things that they would do is start talking to one another.
I want to be nuanced throughout
Yeah.
it all. because I think there is a lot of efforts that are made, and we cannot deny them. I think there is an effort to make it work, etc. Morocco has always been a capitalist society. I mean, during the Cold War, it has been on the side of the West and not on the side of the East. Social protections, etc., is something that is quite brand new. So Morocco now is establishing UHC, universal health coverage. It is establishing unemployment benefits, etc., etc. But all of this is quite new and modern, and an effort to kind of lift the population's living standards. But it is a country where capital has always played the role. State has always been central in terms of planning, but it has always been a country that is very more capital driven, regardless. And that was created a lot of wealth and a lot of inequalities, both at the same time, as in every other place in the world. So I'm not trying to take any. I'm trying to stay in my role as an academic and not be, taking any
No,
sort
sorry,
of.
this is my job to be a little bit forward in some of my questions,
No,
simply
definitely.
because I don't think these issues are raised in cannabis. Somehow people think cannabis sits separately from other, you know, primary products, and
Mm,
it is a primary product.
mm,
And I see the same playbooks
mm.
operating that I've seen, post World War II, basically.
The problem also with cannabis is that, again, we're talking about a very, but the biggest problem is that, again, I'll say it again, is that we're talking about a very small market, and we want to use that small market to really solve big problems. That is not going to happen. I mean, so you were asking what is next. So, I mean, in Morocco, it's very, very difficult to foresee a legalization for recreational. Morocco loves to be very compliant with international law. It's not going to be a Canada or an Uruguay. Maybe if the US changes and the US goes on a federal level into legalization, that would kind of start to shift the discussion in many different places, and that can influence actually Morocco itself. But looking at it now, never say never, but there is no sign showing that this is the direction where it would go in any way in the foreseeable future. And now there is where all these bigger discussions will happen. So now, in terms of innovation, I think that the current status of the Moroccan law and implementation on medical cannabis is so restrictive that it kills innovation itself. So we want the farmers just to produce and sell, respect very, very strict guidelines on the production, on the quality, on the levels of different components and ingredients. But we really do not allow for an ecosystem to come up with
Is the
blockbuster.
tertiary education system interested in more involvement, or does it wait for pointers from central government to allow it to do so?
There is some research actually on agricultural research on the Bildia, the traditional strain specificities, etc. But we're still missing the social sciences. There is no ecosystem that is in place. This is not a discussion that is built around a whole ecosystem or systemic approach. We're very far from, how China developed EV cars. We are totally quite the contrary. We're not having that very systematic socioeconomic approach. And that is one of the biggest criticisms that are happening now in Morocco around the legalization project, because people are saying, okay, well, remains a very low enforcement approach. So when we need something that is very related to the development of the region view that would include everything. So we're missing the social science research. We're missing a lot of this around the legalization project. When it also happened, it has created a lot of appetite for investors in Morocco without really a deep understanding of what it is
It
or
is.
what they
Okay.
yeah or what they have facing them. We're talking about a region that had political issues, that had economic issues, that had social issues, that had historically since the 20s, throughout the time, a lot of uprisings and a lot of issues with the central state, etc. Something that has been appeased in the last 25 years. But this is a region that still, that is a boiling ground, that has contraband with the Spanish enclaves, that has a lot of different, criminal organizations there, farmers finding themselves or populations finding themselves caught in the middle of